Hello and welcome to Seattle City Makers. I'm your host, Jon Scholes. Well, welcome to episode 12, which I think makes us now a toddler in podcast years, which I'm told are less than human years. Not quite, doesn't work like dog years. We're just entering our toddlerhood, and I think you've got to do like 100 of these to really get into adulthood. But in any event, we are having a lot of fun with this podcast and the opportunity to bring you conversations with leaders from across the city of Seattle from a variety of sectors. We're talking to folks in arts and culture and music and food and business about their decisions and their leadership and the impact that they're having on how we all experience Seattle today and in the future. And if you're like me, you are still riding the high from last week's announcement that Seattle will be one of 10 U.S. host cities for the World Cup in 2026. Just an incredible announcement and news for our city. And hats off to Beth Knox, the president of the Seattle Sports Commission, who was a guest a couple episodes ago with us on the podcast, and Maya Mendoza-Ekstrom, the chief operating officer of the Seattle Sounders, two incredible leaders who led Seattle's bid to bring the World Cup here and put in many, many months and really years of effort to make the case that Seattle will be and is a great place to bring a big event to. So that is just going to be a terrific experience for our city and for the players and the fans. So riding that high, and summer looks to be finally here this week for like real. So pleased about the forecast and the warmer weather and bluer skies that are on the way. And we've just had an incredible couple of weeks in downtown of record hotel occupancy. We had the highest hotel occupancy of the 25 top markets in the U.S. about 2 weeks ago, and more people downtown over the course of 7 days than any 1 week since the beginning of the pandemic. So just some great momentum in downtown with the return of visitors, both conventioneers and crews, but also leisure travelers, and then more locals just on the streets as well. So just a lot of vibrancy and a lot of progress as we continue to emerge and renew from this pandemic. And for episode 12, I'm really pleased to be joined by Matt Griffin, the managing partner of the Pine Street Group, who recently announced that he'll be retiring from nearly a 40 plus year career really in development and construction within downtown. Matt has had his hand in a number of really notable and significant projects across development types, from retail and office and residential, and is close to wrapping up the development and completion of the new addition to the Seattle Convention Center over there between Interstate 5 and the Paramount over on 9th and Boren. And I wanted to sit down with Matt because he's had certainly a huge impact on the cityscape and in downtown, and had his hand in a number of complicated and really significant, meaningful projects, but has also seen a lot of tough times in downtown and been a part of some notable projects when downtown faced some headwinds and recessions and challenges in the retail core, much like we face today as we emerge from this pandemic. And Matt, also having developed a number of different types of projects, brings a real unique perspective on some of the big questions facing not just downtown Seattle, but urban areas across the country and across the world around the future of work and events and urban areas. So real pleased to have the opportunity to sit down with Matt as he wraps up his real notable career and contributions to the downtown skyline and downtown community and neighborhood, and talk through those issues and more. So hope you enjoy my conversation with Matt Griffin, the managing partner of the Pine Street Group. So did you get out on a ride today?
I did.
Where'd you go?
I went just down to Rainier Beach, and it was beautiful. And Evelyn said, it's so nice today. I'm going to go ride around the lake. See you later. I said, I'll go work. You go ride.
Okay.
Yeah, perfect.
Well, it was a beautiful day for that or anything.
As good as anything. It's as good as they get today.
Feels like summer.
Yeah.
Finally. So thanks for doing this with us. And your recent announcement that you're concluding your career with the Pine Street Group of almost 30 years?
Almost 30 years. Yeah. We've been named different things. I mean, we were doing Pacific Place, we're called Pine Street Development, and the Pine Street Group is 2000. But 25 or 30 years with this gang, and then 40 some in downtown.
So it's kind of a nice opportunity to take a tour through your mind of the projects that you've helped develop and bring to fruition in downtown. And to me, they've always been, all of them sort of share a couple things in common. they're all like super complicated, it seemed, and have come about at times where there was a lot of uncertainty in downtown.
Right.
And so I think that's part of the backdrop here too, as we are in another one of those times of, face some tough headwinds coming out of this pandemic, and some lessons that I think we can learn from your experience on these projects for around the resiliency and the ability for downtowns in general, certainly this one, to adapt and persevere. So how would you, if someone's asking you how downtown's doing today, as someone who lives and works and breathes it and walks it and busses it, what's your assessment of where we stand today?
Well, I think where we are today isn't great. Okay, it isn't great. Obviously, if we could go back to 2019, it was quite fun. But we're a lot better off today than we were a year ago, and so the trend line is good. And so, for a math person or an engineer, it's the first derivative. Is how's the progress? And so I'm actually quite pleased with the progress in the last 6 months. I compliment the mayor and his staff on trying to do it, and it's not easy, and trying to do it with less police and et cetera. But we're starting to rebound, and it's getting much better. So that's cool.
I share your assessment.
Yeah. As another downtown resident.
Yes. And today feels especially good. The blue sky and more feet on the street help. So before we dive into one of the first big moves that you were a part of, the 1111 3rd on 3rd Avenue, brought to downtown, 1980. How'd you make the move from construction to development?
Yeah, it's interesting. I'm a kid who always sort of banged on the lumber in the backyard and worked construction, and then was an engineer. And I worked for Howard Wright Construction Company for the couple of years after college. And basically in winter of 77, Howard Wright, the Space Needle guy, asked me out for lunch, and he said, "How would you be interested in going to work in my development company instead of being in the construction company?" And that's how the idea got started. And I ended up going to work with Runstead and Norberg in the summer of 77. And I thought, well, heck, I'll try it for a couple of years, and if I don't like it, I'll go back to being a contractor.
And was 1111 kind of the first project that landed on your desk?
1111 landed on my desk, although I was hired to do sort of special assignments for Runstead, whatever that meant. And there was a 22-story building designed there, and it was partially designed. And a couple things. One is we went to a meeting about 2 or 3 months there, and Runstead introduced me as the project manager. And I thought, oh shit, I better get organized. It was kind of a surprise. But also then we decided that Howard Wright was really the one. He said, God, it's too bad we aren't building a bigger building. And so we entered into an agreement of transferring development rights from the Rainier Bank across the street, which I think was the first transfer of development rights in Seattle. And so that was done in 77 or 78, and the building opened in 1980. And you and I've talked a little bit about this in the past, but that was the first high-rise really on 3rd Avenue. And we made a conscious decision about going to 3rd Avenue as about elsewhere because of the mass transit. So as early as then and before the tunnel, mass transit was a key driver as how we saw downtown developing.
And how'd the project land and perform in the market? I mean, that was a period, I guess, later in the 80s where we had a lot of spec office buildings. But did that one end up being one of the first in that phase of development?
Well, yes, it did. This one actually got lucky because Rainier Tower had been done in about 74, and there wasn't any other big building. And we happened to lock in our construction prices before a big spurt of inflation. And then we happened to be able to capitalize on the inflation in our rents. So it turned out to be quite fortunate. I mean, not smart, just good fortune. But then we went on to do I went on to be involved in other buildings for Wright Runstead in the 80s, which had some of the issues you're talking about.
Mm-hmm. What's the ratio of smarts to good fortune in development and generally, and in your career?
Well, it's clearly,
where do you hope it lands?
I don't know where I hope it lands, but it's clearly more good fortune than smarts. I think too often people in the development business overrate the smarts, and they often think they're smart when they've been lucky, and been fortunate to be lucky a couple times.
So from 1111, you go to Wells Fargo Center?
Yeah, Wells Fargo Center. Mm-hmm.
So also you just kind of moved down the street?
Moved down the street.
On 3rd.
That street. And, that was interesting. It was a question of the bank actually owned the property, and they owned 3/4 of the block. And the reason that building is designed on an angle like that is because we didn't own the northwest corner. And so the whole building got designed like that. I mean, it looks better for the views, but it all got designed like that. And then partway through the design, we were finally able to acquire the Olympic National Life building on the northwest corner, and it allowed us to expand the building. But again, it was one that had a ground lease from the bank and had a big anchor lease from the bank and had an anchor lease from Burlington Northern and, had all the kind of complications that go along with a big project.
And you've done a few things outside of downtown. One of them and been involved in is notably U Village. Early in the days,
right,
but still have, I think, ownership stake in the project.
Yeah, it might be good just to sort of keep the chronological order. But 1201 came next.
Oh, I skipped one.
1201 came next, and 1201 is interesting. For me, it's interesting. A couple things. In about 1982 or 83, I said to my Wright Runstead colleagues, "Look, my wife and I want to take a year off and ride our bikes around the world. And if we get to a point where we've got the design done, we've got the construction contract done, we've got all the permits, and we've got the financing in place, I get to take a year off." And so when we said that, when it was 3 or 4 years off, everybody thought, "Oh God, if we can just get all that stuff done, great." And so fortunately, we got all that stuff done in 86 with a key anchor lease from the Perkins Coie guys, where they were also our partner. And then Evelyn and I were gone for a year. And
where were you riding?
We took a bike trip around the world.
All over the place.
Well, all over the place. But we rode 13,500 miles. We were in 33 countries. We were behind the Iron Curtain when there were machine guns and barbed wire. We stayed in China and towns that never had a foreign visitor. I mean, it was a good adventure, and actually did a lot to change our life, which is a bigger subject. But we each had 30 pounds, including tools to take a bike apart. And you come home and you go, "Why do I own all this shit?" And so again, that changed our life. Changed our life a lot. But I think the other part about that that was interesting, that also has some other repercussions, is we thought there would be one building competing with us. We were 1 million square feet, and we thought there'd be one other at 1 million. But in fact, there ended up being 3 more. Gateway, which became Seattle Municipal Tower. There was 2 Union, and there was U.S. Bank Center. So
most of these were spec, is that right?
They were all spec. Yeah. They were all spec. And in those days, 500,000 square feet was about a year's worth of absorption. So when I came back, we basically were in a mess, right? It was a mess. And I took on the role of basically figuring out how to make a deal with Washington Mutual. And we made an agreement to buy Washington Mutual's block where 2nd and Seneca is at an inflated price. They leased space for us, and then we also agreed to build 2nd and Seneca 4 years later, which was kind of kicking the can down the street. So, but anyway, we got it done, and we survived. And the other 3 buildings all went into bankruptcy or receivership, and we had to pay $10 million to keep ours alive, but we survived. And we sort of thought, I came to the conclusion, I'm never doing a spec office building again. It's a little bit like saying to God, just get me through this one. I promise never to do it again.
Do you remember what the occupancy or vacancy was at the time when you were delivering that?
I don't, but it was high, but it was also hidden because, again, if only 500,000 square feet is a year's worth of absorption, the way you end up filling those buildings is you buy forward. You buy future basically absorption, and you do that by taking over existing leases. Mm-hmm. So you take over an existing lease, but you have to pay for it. So it looks like it's full, but on the other hand, it's the same tenant only occupying one, and the landlord's paying for the other. Mm-hmm. But it was clearly in the teens. I mean, I don't think it got to 20, but it was high, and it was uncomfortable.
So 3 towers on 3rd, and then 2nd and Seneca.
2nd Seneca. And 2nd Seneca, I just put the deal together, and then I left to do other things. Yeah, and then as you said, we were asked by Stuart Sloan to come in his office one day, and he said, "I've got something you might want to work on." And it turned out that U Village was for sale, and he was the chairman of QFC, and they owned the dairy next door. And he said, this was in 93, and he said, "Would you go figure out whether QFC ought to partner with somebody or whether QFC ought to buy the village, or maybe you and I buy the village?" And
what was the Village in 93 for those of us that don't remember what was there? I mean, obviously the grocery store and the parking lot, and what else was there?
Yeah, so it was interesting. It was a small grocery store of about 20,000 feet, QFC. It was Lamont's department store, about 100,000 feet. It had Ernst and it had PanSafe. And
classic Northwest brands.
Classic Northwest brands. Yeah. And not doing very well. And so anyway, so I got involved in that, and we put that together and worked out an arrangement to partner up in essence with QFC on the dairy next door and allow QFC to build there and have the two combined operate so the customer didn't know they were moving from one to the other. And did that in 93, and it opened in the fall of 93. And then Evelyn and I took off on our bikes for Cabo and then flew down to South America and spent the rest of that year in South America riding our bikes.
What'd you come back to? Was it as tricky as the mid-'80s?
The answer is no, it didn't tricky. U-Village was off on a good chart with Stuart Sloan and Tom Cronquist, et cetera, doing that. But when I was in South America, Bill Lewis called me, the Lee Scretcher Lewis fellow, an old friend of mine, and said that there were people trying to put together the project that became Pacific Place and asked if I wanted to help. And I said, no, I'd rather not work that hard when I get back. And then when I came back in the fall of 93, at that time, which I'm not anymore, but I was a partner with him in their construction company, Bill said, we're in a joint venture with Sellon to basically do this 3-block project. And would you mind just figuring out whether it's going to go forward? And if it is, then we know we could keep working on it. And I did a sort of my own sort of due diligence for a month and came back and said, well, probably go forward if they get better organized. And I agreed to help them get organized and get started in construction. But part of the financing was a requirement that I stay. So my life changed.
And the context around all of that at the time, Frederick Nelson closed,
right,
boarded up,
right.
I-Magnin up the street,
boarded
closed,
up,
and kind of a mess in the retail core of downtown, and a lot sort of at risk and at stake.
Right. And as you and I have talked about before, I mean, in many ways, downtown was in a lot rougher shape than it was during the pandemic.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, because it was boarded up and there weren't any tenants and there wasn't any office space. And we were very fortunate to have great leadership from Norm Rice as mayor, to have a group of Seattle families that were willing to put money in their hometown. And then, of course, the Nordstrom family and company that was willing to make this investment in their hometown. We were quite lucky.
Do you think that kind of deal and project could come together in today's Seattle, or were there some unique aspects in place back in the mid-'90s, early 90s?
Oh, I think there were unique aspects for sure, but I think it could come together again today. I mean, I think we see some of that going on at the waterfront right now.
Mm-hmm.
With the Friends of the Waterfront raising 100 to 200 million, making a major difference. And I think they've already raised 100 or just about 100 and plan to get to 200. And we'll look back on this and say, thank God all these local people did it. And it's a combination of government and local families making a difference. And I think we're very fortunate to have people like that. We still have them.
Yeah, that seems to be, if you ask me, that seems to be an important recipe of government and business work together. Everybody's got a role. Yeah,
I actually just wrote a paper on this for my college and about Seattle. And I think that one of the things that is so unique is people don't come here and just pass through in their career. They come here and they decide they like it, and it becomes their city. And when it becomes their city, they have a longer term perspective. I mean, Nordstrom's obviously been here forever and lots of others. But many of the other people, they come here and they go, oh my God, I like it here. This is a place. I want my kids to grow up here and my grandkids. And so they put their back to the wheel. We're lucky to have that.
We don't want to leave, and we want to make it better since we're going to be here to enjoy it.
You got it.
Yeah.
You got it.
So while we're on the topic of Pacific Place, been in the news lately,
right.
Potential purchase by Hudson Pacific out of California from Madison Marquette. And they've proposed the idea of putting a couple towers on top of the 5-story retail on top of the underground parking garage. There's been a variety of perspectives on what that could mean or not mean for downtown, for retail. What's your take, recognizing there's still a lot of details for Hudson Pacific to come forward with and sort out, but the general idea that's been reported. What's your perspective on it?
Yeah, and my comments are all just as sort of what I read in the newspaper and what I think myself, right? But if I go back again to Jane Jacobs' book from 1960 about the life and death of cities, and I go back to what we needed in Pacific Place on Pine Street in that area in those days, we need more people on the streets. I mean, people on the sidewalks, lively sidewalks or healthy sidewalks, and they're safe. And so we need to get more density in that neighborhood to make the neighborhood better. And I don't know if the towers make sense or not. They might very well. I mean, when we sold it in about 2014, we at least explained how towers could be built there, and the FAR was available. But the real key is, I think, it's just more people on that block. And in today's world, there aren't as many retailers as there used to be. And so you want to make those retailers enliven the street level. And then if you need other people above to make sure you got enough density on the block, offices or medical offices or any of those things are important. So I'm all in favor of seeing that transition happen. I mean, we'd love to have it go back to what it was. We've got to remember that the world's evolved. We as a country had more retail space than anybody per person. Mm-hmm. And the evolution's going on. So we need to respond.
And you saw that evolution taking place when you sold it, I imagine, in
we did,
2016, 15?
14, I think. Yeah, but as you asked me earlier about how much is luck and how much is smarts, we probably got more luck on that one than we did smarts. I mean, we got a little bit of smarts, but we've got some luck too. We got some luck.
Moving on from Pacific Place, via 6. Did I skip one?
Yeah, you did. But so, you skipped one.
Skip?
Oh, I don't know. We'll figure it out.
It is a few.
We'll figure it out. But here's the little story here that goes along. It's pretty interesting. We finished Pacific Place and renovating the former Nordstrom store and the Seaboard building in about 2000. And there were half a dozen people that assembled on all of that. And I said to my wife, I think I've got to figure out at the end of 2000 about whether or not we go do something else or whether I just kind of hang it up, because I didn't really mean to be so busy for the last 20 years. And she said, well, Matt, here's what's going to happen. You're going to basically let your team go, and then somebody's going to come to you with some interesting problem to solve, and you're going to want to solve it, and you're going to be furious that you don't have your team anymore. So she said, I suggest you take some money out of your savings account and hold your team together and see what comes along. And about that time, almost, in fact, in December of 2000, WAMU came to us and asked if we'd figure out about how to do their headquarters.
No, of course. How did I skip that one?
I don't know, but anyway,
it took a big leap.
Well, it took a big leap. But again, and we said no, and then we said yes, and then we ended up going to work with them, and it turned out to be a great relationship, and they were very good to work with. And, they were probably they were clearly the biggest employer in downtown.
Yeah.
And we leased space for them in 1111 and 2nd and Seneca and 1201 and got out of leases in Wells Fargo Center. And then, but that only took care of about half the requirements. So then came the idea of putting the thing together with Seattle Art Museum. So that was our next big step. And so all that got done. And
how did the art museum get in the picture? Who brought that idea forward, or that relationship?
Well, we were standing in Kerry Killinger's office in the northwest corner of 1201, and we looked out the window about where we were going to get the other 800,000 feet. And we said, we really ought to get it there. And the bank said, well, we've tried to buy that property from them before. And I said, well, the thing that's changed in that northern half of the block, they used to have Nordstrom in it, and they had Seattle Best Coffee. And those tenants are both gone now. So they may not be as anxious to sort of keep it, not have such a luxury when they have debt on that property and they don't have somebody paying the rent. Mm-hmm. So Charlie Wright, the R.D. Merrill fellow, I was getting a ride home from him from a board meeting, and I said, I have this idea about how we should do this, and the bank would put the money up and we'd do this on the block. And I explained quite a bit of the detail to him about my idea, and he said, I think that's a great idea. Let me call Brotman tonight. And he and Brotman and Norberg and I got together the next day, and within about 24 hours, we had most of it figured out. Now we had to get the bank to agree, and we had to get the Art Museum board to agree. But that whole combination of the bank building everything they could build, the museum building what they wanted for their 25-year expansion, and then taking what they could afford up front and the bank leasing the rest, the numbers all seemed to work okay. So that turned out to be a very good idea, and that's how it came about. And Charlie Wright was the great board member at the Art Museum that worked through it with us. Mm-hmm. And it was all great until WAMU went down. And
then the Great Recession hits, and
and WAMU went down first.
WAMU collapses.
Yeah. So when so again, it was a great idea. All worked great, all that kind of stuff. We got a very efficient building, et cetera. And then when WAMU went down, I still remember reading the newspaper and just kind of going for a walk around downtown for a couple hours and trying to think what this meant for downtown. We obviously got smashed. And about that time, after being in a position of helping WAMU figure out what they should do, and then putting together and then working for WAMU, and then putting together a joint venture for WAMU and Seattle Art Museum, and then working for the joint venture. Now with WAMU going down, we got asked to help Sam negotiate with Chase, and then with Northwestern Mutual Life, and then fill the 250,000 feet that WAMU had vacated, mm-hmm. and for Sam that put him about $50 million in the hole. So kind of, went to work a different part of the problem, but luckily we figured out a piece of that with the Nordstroms again. Mm-hmm. And
they took some of that space, right?
All of it. Mm-hmm. And in 3 or 4 different steps, they took all of it. And so that allowed Sam to basically have enough money to pay the debt service.
Was that a business move or a civic move or both on their part, you think?
Oh, I don't think the Nordstroms do anything without having some civic motivation. I mean, they're just good folks, right? They're good folks. But it was also a good business decision. As I remember, and this may not be quite right, but the Nordstrom had in their current offices, had about 250 or 270 square feet per person. The bank space, which we did very efficiently, was down. It was a bigger floor plan, and it was about 220 square feet per person. And Sam had owned all their furniture. So here we were able to give Nordstrom a chance to move into space that was already downsized like they were trying to do. And they could realize that the savings in all the furniture, as well as the improvements, gave them a real step and an ability to drive down their operating costs. So it was a really good fit for them. It was a really good fit. And Northwestern Mutual Life, John McAllister, you may know, they bought the office building from Chase, and they were a great partner as we pursued together the Nordstrom piece. I mean, they deputized me or us to go figure out the deal with Nordstrom, and about a quarter of the space was in their building and 3/4 of it was in Sam's. So anyway, good folks, good thing got done. We feel fortunate.
And then Via 6.
Was
there a bike ride in between of any notable length?
I don't think so. Okay. I don't think so.
So then the Great Recession is percolating here and elsewhere.
Right.
And you decide to go do a big old twin tower apartment building.
Yeah.
Over 6th and Lenora, right?
Yeah. But, the interesting part is that our friends at Bentall Kennedy owned the north 4 lots, and they had a 40-story apartment built or designed. And the costs were higher than they expected. And so they asked us if we would come in and help them. And we said, the first thing we got to do is we got to build a smaller building. We got to own all 6 lots. And if we own all 6 lots, we can make a much more efficient garage. And buildings at 240 square feet have a bunch of different code issues and zoning issues even at that time.
240 feet.
240 feet high. Excuse me. 240 feet high. Excuse me. Yep. 240 feet high. And the other 2 lots were owned by Al Kleiss. And they said, well, we just need to get from Al. And went over to meet with Al, and Al says, well, we really don't want to sell. I mean, typical Al Kleiss. And he said, but I'll tell you what we do. there's a block down the street that we own the whole block except 2 lots. And the guy that owns those 2 lots hates us and we hate him. If you go get those 2 lots, we'll trade you. And it took a year. It took a year. But that's what happened. And that allowed us to expand the footprint and make a more efficient garage and be closer to the Westlake station. Because at that time, Amazon hadn't decided to go forward. So being close to the Westlake station, every foot in my mind made a difference about being closer to the transportation hub to make it a great location. So it allowed us to put that main entrance on Lenore and 6th, and then obviously have different towers. And
then the luck comes in when Amazon decides to be across the street, right?
That's clearly the luck. Clearly luck. And but I would also say the other good thing that happened in that one is Bentall Kennedy was our partner, and it was back in the days when John Parker was there. And similar to being a great partner with us on Pacific Place, they were a great partner with us on Via 6 in building it. And they said, we don't have to wait for the full recovery, but when the graph starts to move and the economy just starts to change, we'll authorize you to get started. And so that allowed us to build it during a time, again, a little bit like 11/11, when the costs were low, get it done and come into a rebound. And so again, we got a little bit of good luck there too.
And was one of the first major, if not the first, major residential projects sort of coming out of the ground in that period downtown, if I recall, certainly with the scale that you had, of 600 plus
640 units. In fact, I think if I'm not mistaken, it was the largest residential project ever built in Seattle in one phase. So we were coming out of a recession. We made a bet that it was going to be the right thing to do. And there's a bunch of interesting comments about why we thought that was the right bet, but that's what we did. And things that are still true today. I mean, people don't need as much space as we have in all parts of life. Part of it came out of my bike trip. That we don't need to own everything. We just need access to it. So whether it be a party room or the hub or the bar, or a pool table, whatever it is, you don't need to own it. You just need access to it. And the idea of sharing things with other people not only satisfies that, but it gives all these tech workers coming to Seattle, and anybody coming to Seattle to start their career, a chance to meet people. And we're all dying to meet people outside of work, because you become so insular when you spend so many hours working. So,
such a great building.
So it fit that.
Still to this day, although it's not that old, but it's the way you all approach the design at the ground level still, I think, creates those opportunities that you speak of to meet a bunch of other people and connect.
And I haven't had a beer and dinner there since last night. But I think Ethan Stoll with the Victor Tavern that he's put in on the ground floor has done even a better job of making that all come to reality.
Yeah.
He's done a great job.
It's a great downtown tavern and space.
It's great.
And you pushed the envelope on the amount of parking you built relative to the number of units in that project. What you ended up being at 0.6 parking
that sounds about right.
Did that ever keep you up at night of like, oh, maybe we're squeezing this too much and these renters are going to want a place for their car? Did you feel pretty confident? No, this is where the market is and we can make this work? Because you were pretty far off what the average downtown would be at that time, if I'm right.
Yes. So there are 2 or 3 different things that were run-ups to that. Part of the 3-block deal on Pacific Place was renovating the Seaboard building. And the Seaboard had no parking. And my wife and I moved downtown with 2 cars in 2000, and she had a BMW sports car. In 2 weeks, she said, it's out of here. I'll never use it. And then 2 years later, we went to start my Jeep, and it was dead. The battery was dead. And I said, well, let's do an experiment and basically decide if we need a second car. She said, we just did the experiment. Get rid of it. If you don't like it, we'll buy another car, right? And so we'd gone without a car downtown, and we realized that you don't need them. And the second one is then when we built Russell Investment Center, WAMU Sam's time, there was a parking requirement for the office building. And WAMU didn't require parking. So to get our building permit, we coveted the Hewlett Parker garage across the street so that it became part of our permitting process. Then during the construction of the building, we got the minimum removed for downtown because we said we want people to be on light rail. We want people to be in the bus tunnel. And basically, the WAMU already has good habits, so don't make us add all that parking. We got the code changed while we were building the building, and then that allowed us WAMU to sell the Hello Parker garage to basically the Four Seasons developers and build a better neighborhood instead of having a garage. So, to answer your question, I was a little worried about it, but not too. I think that the place where we didn't do it right is we thought that there would be more small cars instead of big cars. And we thought that the price of fuel, et cetera, and evolution and the environmental things would drive us to small cars. And so we could have done a better job on the column spacing. But I never worried about the number of stalls.
You could say that for a few other garages
Yeah,
downtown. Speak from experience.
Exactly.
But so from Pacific or from Via 6, and then you still owned and controlled Pacific Place, and then sold it in 14.
Right.
You make your way to the convention center project. A few things in between, right?
Right. No, not much. Not much. Not much.
You had a YMCA.
Oh, yeah.
Named in your honor in SeaTac because of your leadership and raising a bunch of money to get that thing built. And
which was a nice surprise.
Yeah, and certainly a lot of nonprofit and civic involvement over that period. But your other private development projects weren't complicated enough, and you got involved in building, in addition to the convention center, above a transit facility next to a freeway, dealing with city, state, county.
Keep going.
Well,
yeah. No,
take it from there.
Yeah. Okay.
And today we look at. I just passed it the other day. I think the lights were on inside, which is the first time I'd seen the lights on, which was pretty cool.
Yeah, that's cool.
Coming down Boren.
It's going to be cool. There's no doubt about it.
So how'd you get involved in this project that is almost done here?
Almost done. Almost
a little
done.
ways to go.
So a couple of things. So, first of all, I get kidded a lot about the fact that I like complex projects, and it's really not quite the right thing to say. But what I do say is that we're willing to tolerate complexity to get important things done. And so we sometimes that margin of being able to tolerate the complexity, like the Sam Russell investment or transferring the air rights and, for 11 years ago, are all part of getting it done, or getting the property that Kleist wanted that took a year. All those things are part of tolerating complexity. So the convention center clearly had all of that. The way that we got involved actually is Frank Finneran and Jerry Hillis, Frank, chair of the board, and Jerry, one of the senior board members that I'd done work for. They came over to our office and asked if we'd help. And at that point, it was in 2013, if I remember correctly. And they said the Honda properties were being sold. The Honda properties, which were owned by the Castleford family, were being sold, and asked if we would, just for starters, come and help them negotiate how to buy those. And so agreed to do that in 2013. And about 2 years later, we signed a development management agreement with him. Mm-hmm. But for 2 years, we just kind of helped here and there as asked, and tried to move the project forward.
What was the most challenging aspect of the project prior to the pandemic, really throwing a lot of uncertainty into it?
Probably the entitlements.
Just getting control of the dirt.
Yeah.
And what you wanted to do with the public sector.
Yeah, a little bit of everything. I mean, we acquired property from the Castleford family. We acquired the bus tunnel or bus station from King County that came with restrictions about letting the buses still run during construction for 6 months. We had to negotiate with Sound Transit. We had one piece that we had to ask the county to condemn. And then we had a ground lease with WashDOT that overhangs the ramps. That was the last piece to get done. So all that is kind of more normal. But then we had to vacate 3 alleys. And we had to vacate below Olive and below Terry. And by the time we got through that process with the city, which was very difficult, we had spent $93 million in public benefits besides paying for the market price of the dirt. And that took years. It took years, and it was painful.
So we're coming up on 10 years since you first got involved, right, with Frank, but coming close to completion here.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. But again, it's talking about the why tolerate this complexity, and the convention center had it right. I mean, and the board gets clearly credit for this, is that part of what people like about Seattle and coming to conventions here in Seattle is, first of all, Seattle's a great city. and we're going to bounce back, and we're going to be great. And as we already see on the weekends, there's more people coming to visit here all the time. But they love the fact that they go to their hotels, drop their bags, and be able to walk to the convention center. And so many other convention centers are on the outskirts of downtown, and you got to take a bus from Montreal, whatever it is.
And there's nothing interesting around it.
Nothing interesting around it. So in this particular case, if you want a big building like this and you want it in downtown, it's 7.7 acres, I think, a site. You're going to have to deal with streets and alleys and overhangs and all those kind of things. And they're the ones that really made the decision that this is worthwhile. We ought to try to get it done. And basically have all those people walking on our streets and use that to enliven our neighborhood. So,
a little hiccup that the pandemic threw at you with the significant decline in hotel revenue, which is a source of helping to pay the construction bonds, but you sort of weathered the storm, and we saw a little bit faster recovery than anticipated. Is that generally how you kind of kept things going?
Generally, when the convention center became its own public facilities district in the summer of 2010, it came with its own tax stream. The 7.8, I forget now. But anyway, roughly 7% in the city and roughly 3% in the county. Those aren't the exact numbers, but roughly that on the hotel rooms. But it also had caveats that it couldn't issue bonds against future increases in the taxes. It could only do it based on taxes that had been received. And so in 2018, when we started construction, the most that they could issue was about $1.1 billion. And so we had to basically plan on future increases in order to be able to do the rest of the bonds. And so obviously 2019, we were rolling along and basically moving in the right direction. And then when the pandemic hit in 2020, the hotel room tax went to the bottom, went to be less than 2019. And so we were stuck, couldn't issue any bonds. So we had to get agreement from the state treasurer that we could change that rule. And then fortunately, what happened in the start of 2021 is when people were so starved for yields on bonds, in Chicago, the schools did an offering of $500 million, and it was oversubscribed 10-1. And we came to realize that people wanted yield, and they were looking for cities that had great futures, but they were in a short-term problem. And they issued bonds against those, realizing that you put some reserves aside for the debt service up front. And as they looked around the country, they said, Seattle's clearly in that spot. It's got a great future. It's in a hiccup. It's got places for long 40-year bonds. We just got to ask them to reserve part of the proceeds to the short term to take care of it. Mm-hmm. And again, when we got ready to issue our bonds, they were 9 times oversubscribed, which allowed us to basically move the rate down 8 or 9 basis points the morning of the bond issue. Mm-hmm. So anyway, Fred Eoff was a consultant to the convention center. He gets a huge amount of the credit for putting that together. And Stacy Lewis, who works with Jerry Johnson, terrific lawyer who did all the bond work. And so some great people, again, locally made it all happen.
So when you cut the ribbon on that project, where's the bike ride after?
So my wife has said that, this year-long bike ride, I've done it twice and once was enough. So we aren't doing that again. But she's pretty game on a month bike ride.
Yeah.
And as you may know, we spent 3 weeks in Poland last year, which was a great trip. And we'll do more of that kind of stuff. We'll be gone. She doesn't like to be out of town any more than about 8 weeks a year. But so we'll do some bike trips. And personally, I'd really like to spend more time with my fly ride and read more books. Yeah. So hopefully that happens. And fortunately, she would rather fly fish than ride a bike. So that's a good pair.
So I don't want to let you get out of here without asking about your take on the future of office. A lot of debate about return to work and remote work. You've had your hand in developing, as we've discussed, a lot of office buildings. What's your sense of where we end up, 6 months, a year from now?
Yeah, 6 months or a year from now is kind of hard to tell. But I clearly see us with more people coming back to the office. And I see a healthy rebound in the office when I go out farther. And I don't know exactly how far it is, but if you're building an asset for 5 years from now or longer, and especially one that's going to be 5 to 50 years in terms of value, I feel quite good about it. I feel quite good about it for a number of reasons. But I think we've all found that, yeah, you can work from home, and yeah, for some things it works okay, but you really miss the creative energy that comes from people being able to collaborate. And we were talking about internally here this morning, and about somebody says, well, I'm only supposed to write 50 lines of code, which isn't our work a day. And I can write 50 lines of code at home. And the thing you don't know is if you, next to the other gal, maybe they give you an idea and you only have to write 25 lines of code. And when you're at home, you never get that comment.
Mm-hmm.
You never get that comment. And so I think the collaboration is going to be important. I mean, when Elon Musk tells everybody they got to come back to work, he's clearly being out in front a little more like he usually is. And then the other part is, as downtown opens up and more of the bars and restaurants get operating, it's going to be more fun to come downtown. You could be at home, but you're going to miss the fun. Your buddies are going out for a drink after work, or they're going to go out to lunch. And that's a fun part of what happens in a community. And Seattle's got the right bones. And then, as we talked about earlier, I think the increase in mass transit for downtown and what's going on at the waterfront are just going to be game changers. They're going to be game changers. So we're lucky. We've got some great things going on, and it's all rolling. It's all going to happen. We can argue about whether it's going to happen in X year or X plus one, but we've got these good things rolling, and so it'll be a good place to capitalize on.
So if a youngster from one of your alma maters comes to you and says, hey, I want to get into development, what's your advice to him after doing
Don't
this?
Do it.
After that, what's your advice?
Yeah, I don't know. I would say that if you want to get in development because you hear about people making all these rewards, somebody made $1 zillion in development, I don't think you ought to do it. I think that drives the wrong behavior.
Mm-hmm.
If you're interested in building, great places and having, reasonable returns, if you manage your risk correctly, it's a very interesting business. But I think you start at the top that way. I mean, in our little company, we say we want to build a better downtown or a better city. We want to have interesting assignments for our team. We want to be compensated fairly, and we want to work with great people. And, if you do that and you have a good business, it can be quite fun and quite rewarding.
Mm-hmm.
But people that think about doing it for just the funds, I think, end up taking too big of risks and making dumb decisions.
Mm-hmm. We conclude each episode with the question of what's your perfect Saturday in Seattle? I know it starts with a bike ride, so we can move from the early morning ride. After that,
where do I get to go?
Okay. Where's the Saturday ride?
Actually, it's interesting. For the last couple of years during the pandemic, my Evelyn and I have ridden down to Kent to a place called Wild Wheat for breakfast, and it's about a 50-mile route going down. We go down along the Duwamish and then come back, and we do that almost every Saturday. But the rest of my day is to try to read some. Usually, I'm working on The Economist because it comes out electronically on Thursday. Maybe if I'm lucky, I can get started on a book, and then in the evening, get together with our friends or watch a sporting event. And we're big fans of the soccer teams and somewhat Seahawks fan and somewhat basketball teams. And so watching a good sporting event in the evening is a fun thing to do.
Sounds like a great day.
It is a great day. And I hope to do more of those. They won't only happen on Saturdays.
Yeah, there you go. Every day's a Saturday after the end of the year?
Oh, yeah. But some work will continue on into 2023 in the convention center. But I won't come to the off. I won't work on a regular basis.
Well, thanks for making time.
You're welcome. Thanks for asking.
Yeah,
I felt honored.
Contributions to the city and our community and civic life. We did not talk much about your nonprofit and civic engagements, which have been extensive.
We'll do that some other year.
And other places around King County. Nor we didn't touch on your service with the Downtown Seattle Association, but want to make note of that as well as chairing the board and being a member of the board for many, many years. So. Thank you, Matt.
Great. Happy to do it. Thank you.
Well, hope you enjoyed my conversation with Matt Griffin. Just a terrific individual and leader in our community who's had really an outsized impact on our downtown, but also through his civic and nonprofit contributions, and someone I've always appreciated as just a great mentor in my time at the Downtown Seattle Association. So thank you to Matt for joining us and for all that he's done for our city and downtown, and I think will continue to do and find ways to contribute even in retirement. So thanks to Matt. As I do each and every episode, I want to close out with a recommendation of what you just can't miss in downtown Seattle. And my recommendation today is the first Tiger Sugar location, which just opened this past weekend in downtown over at 2nd and Pike. And Seattle Eater describes Tiger Sugar, if you're not familiar, as the Instagram boba sensation, which is known for its brown sugar, syrup-streaked, tiger-striped milk teas. I am not a fan of a lot of sweet things, but I am going to try one of these out. They look pretty delicious. They were founded in Taiwan in 2017 and opened a couple locations in New York City in 2019, which got rave reviews and were incredibly popular, and have recently expanded on the West Coast. And they planted their first flag in Washington State right here in downtown Seattle at 2nd and Pike. They're just down the street, as I should note, from Artley, which is the coffee shop that isn't quite open yet that I made note of a couple of episodes ago, where robots will brew and make your coffee. I think Tiger Sugar is employing humans for the production of their tea, but just down the street from Artley is Tiger Sugar, now open. Again, 2nd and Pike. So check that out. Well, thanks for tuning in. Thanks for listening. I really appreciate your feedback and questions and ideas for guests. You can connect with me on LinkedIn. You can also follow me on Instagram at Jon Scholes if cityscapes and urban scenes and mountain scenes and doodle dog content are your thing. Follow me on Instagram or connect with me on LinkedIn. Would love to hear from you. Seattle City Makers is presented by the Downtown Seattle Association with support from James Cito and production by Spark Creative.